I want you to close your eyes and imagine, just for a moment, that you are suspended in the vast, shimmering expanse of the Western Pacific Ocean. You are somewhere near the lush volcanic islands of Indonesia. But you aren't, floating on the surface feeling the sun on your face. You were hovering just below it.
Right, down on the blue.
Exactly. Immersed in this colossal, heavy pool of water. And the very first thing you notice, the thing that just completely surrounds you, is the heat. It is incredibly, almost uncomfortably warm.
It really is. It's this immense reservoir of thermal energy. And to truly understand what is happening down here, we have to grasp the sheer scale of it.
Which is massive, right?
Oh, completely. We aren't talking about like a warm current or a small bay. We are talking about a volume of incredibly warm water, so massive that it could easily fill half of the entire Mediterranean Sea.
Wow. Half the Mediterranean just sitting there.
Just sitting there. And for years, this staggering, incalculable weight of heat has been held exactly right here, pinned against the islands of the Western Pacific.
Wait, held by what? Because, when you are down here in the dark blue, you just feel the water. You don't see any walls or barriers holding this massive pool in place.
Yeah, you can't see it from below the surface, but you can absolutely feel its effects on the waves above. It's the wind.
The wind.
Specifically, the relentless, invisible hands of the easterly trade winds. These winds, they blow day after day, month after month, year after year.
Sweeping across the entire Pacific basin.
Exactly. Moving all the way from the coasts of the Americas in the east toward Asia in the west. They act like this giant planetary scale fan.
Right.
And they are physically pushing the sun-warmed surface water westward, piling it up against the Indonesian archipelago.
Okay, I have to stop you there. When you say piling it up, do you mean that like metaphorically? Like the water is just warmer there?
No, not metaphorically.
Or is the ocean actually physically taller? Because the idea of the wind stacking up the ocean sounds like something out of a myth.
Completely literally. The trade winds are so strong and so persistent that they actually drag the surface of the ocean with them.
That is wild.
By the time this water reaches Indonesia, the sea level is physically higher than it is on the other side of the Pacific, near South America.
How many higher are we talking?
We are talking about a difference of up to 0.5 meters, or about 1.5 feet.
1.5 feet of pure ocean water.
Pure ocean water, stacked up against gravity, held entirely by the force of the wind.
So you have millions of square miles of ocean physically sloping uphill toward Asia.
Right.
The amount of tension in that system, it must be astronomical.
It's huge.
It's like a tightly coiled spring or pulling back the string on a massive bow. Gravity is desperately trying to pull that water back down to flatten out the ocean, but the wind just refuses to let go.
Exactly. It is a system built on incredible invisible tension, but then a subtle shift occurs.
Because the atmosphere is chaotic.
Right. And sometimes the air above the Western Pacific begins to falter. The steady, reliable, roaring breath of the trade winds starts to whisper.
It weakens.
It weakens. And then, in a phenomenon that scientists track with intense scrutiny, the wind doesn't just die down, it completely reverses.
Now,
We get what are called westerly wind bursts. Suddenly, the wind is blowing backward from west to east.
and when that happens, the invisible hands they let go.
Yeah.
Imagine being that massive, warm entity of water you were swimming within. For years, you've been pushed, compressed, held against the islands, and suddenly the force holding you back vanishes.
As a tension breaks.
You feel the inescapable, crushing pull of gravity take over. The water can no longer maintain its unnatural piled-up height. It has to find balance. It has to move.
And so it begins a slow, magnificent surge eastward, but it doesn't travel the way you might imagine.
It's not a regular wave.
No, it doesn't crest as a crashing, foaming wave that you would see breaking on a beach. It moves as a massive, subtle, underwater undulation.
Like a slow-motion ripple.
Exactly. Sometimes hundreds of miles wide, sliding invisibly through the dark blue depths.
It's a leviathan of heat, beginning a 10,000-kilometer journey back across the largest ocean on Earth. And as it slides eastward, it presses down with immense weight on the freezing dark layers of water below, suffocating the cold.
It's physically heavier. Well, technically lighter because it's warm, but it presses down as a layer.
Right. It looks up at the sky above, carrying enough thermal energy to fundamentally alter the spin of the Earth, shift the flight paths of global storms, and change the breadth of the sky itself.
It really does.
It is waking up in the dark, and it is preparing to change the world.
And this invisible ocean-spanning giant has been doing this exact journey for tens of thousands of years.
Entirely out of sight.
Entirely out of sight, yet intimately connected to every single living thing in the sea.
Welcome back to Saltwater Stories, where we listen to the rhythms of the sea, and where today we are tracking a ghost.
A very warm ghost.
That invisible warm giant we just followed across the Pacific Ocean. Centuries ago, fishermen off the arid, rocky coasts of Peru noticed the very end of its long journey.
They did.
They saw their normally freezing coastal waters turn mysteriously tropical warm right around the month of December.
Which is a huge anomaly for them.
Exactly. And because of the season, they named this mysterious arrival El Niño de Navidad, the Christ child.
And what's fascinating here is that today we recognize that localized warming off the coast of South America as just the final visible footprint of a planetary scale disruption.
Right.
The entire system, the incredibly complex dance between the ocean and the atmosphere dictates the climate of our planet. But we aren't going to look at it today as just a set of atmospheric charts or satellite data points or lines on a graph.
No, we're going to do something much more immersive. We are going to follow the warmth.
I love that.
We are going to travel alongside this thermal giant as it moves, witnessing exactly how a simple, invisible shift in ocean temperature dictates the survival of brilliant corals, the desperate flights of seabirds, and the rhythms of the living sea.
And to truly understand the sheer power of this warmth, we have to travel to the place where its arrival is felt most violently.
Okay, where are we going?
We need to leave the warm waters of the West and go to the normally frigid emerald green waters off the coast of Peru.
Let's transport ourselves there right now.
Perfect.
We are hovering just beneath the surface off the western coast of South America. The water here is normally bone-chillingly cold, fed by a massive current sweeping up from Antarctica.
Very cold.
And because of that cold, it is absolutely exploding with life. Right in front of us is a massive, shimmering school of Peruvian anchoveta.
Oh, they're incredible to see.
Millions upon millions of them, creating a unified silver flash in the sunlit green water. They are small, darting forage fish, usually no bigger than your hand, and they are relentlessly hungry.
And under normal conditions, the ocean provides for them perfectly through a physical process that functions exactly like a silent, incredibly powerful underwater elevator.
An underwater elevator, I like that.
Yeah, to understand why this water is so green and full of life, you have to look at the wind.
The wind again.
Always the wind. Strong coastal winds typically blow parallel to the South American coast, moving from south to north.
Okay, but how does wind blowing along the coast create an underwater elevator? I get how wind can push waves forward, but an elevator goes up and down.
It comes down to something called Ekman transport.
Ekman transport.
Right, which is driven by the rotation of the Earth. As the wind blows north along the coast, the Earth is spinning beneath it.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
This spin, the Coriolis effect, actually deflects the moving surface water out to the west away from the shore.
Oh, weird.
Imagine pushing a block straight forward on a table that is spinning. The block will curve away from you.
So this relentless wind is physically scraping the warm surface water off the top of the ocean and pushing it out to sea.
Exactly.
I see. And because you can't just have a giant hole in the ocean, water has to come from somewhere to replace it.
So it pulls it from the bottom.
From the bottom. Deep, icy water from the abyss rushes up to fill the void.
This is called upwelling. And this deep water isn't just cold. It has been sitting in the dark at the bottom of the ocean for decades, collecting the rain of dead organic matter falling from above.
Gross, but nutritious.
Highly nutritious. Because it's been down in the dark, nothing has been able to grow in it to use up those nutrients.
Because there's no sunlight.
Exactly. So it is absolutely saturated, perfectly packed with nitrates, phosphates, and silicates, the ultimate ocean fertilizers.
So when this icy, nutrient-heavy water rides the elevator up from the dark and finally hits the sunlit zone at the surface, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
A biological fire.
The sunlight hits the fertilizer and it triggers an explosion of life. A microscopic forest of phytoplankton blooms across hundreds of miles of ocean.
It's a massive bloom.
And it's not just one type of plankton. The silicates specifically fuel diatoms, which are these beautiful microscopic organisms that actually build glass-like shells for themselves.
They are stunning under a microscope.
This massive bloom turns the coastal water a cloudy, vibrant emerald green.
And that microscopic forest is the all-you-can-eat buffet that our school of silver anchoveta relies on for survival.
They just feast on it.
They swim through this green soup with their mouths open, filtering out the plankton, turning microscopic algae into solid, silvery fish protein.
It's an incredibly efficient food web.
It really is. It supports the largest single-species fishery on the entire planet.
But then the invisible giant arrives.
It does.
That massive underwater undulation of heat, the Kelvin wave that started its journey 10,000 kilometers away in Indonesia when the wind dropped, finally hits the South American coast.
And it's crucial to understand that it doesn't arrive with a dramatic crash. It doesn't look like a tsunami. It arrives quietly as a heavy, suffocating thermal blanket.
A thermal blanket.
Warm water is less dense than cold water. It's physically lighter. So when this massive pool of heat hits the coast, it floats right on top.
Like oil on water.
Kind of, yeah. It piles up on the surface, creating a thick layer of tropical warmth.
And because it's so heavy and thick, it starts pushing things down. There is a boundary layer in the ocean called the thermocline, which is basically the dividing line between the warm surface water and the freezing, nutrient-rich abyss.
Right.
Normally, off the coast of Peru, that thermocline is very shallow. The cold water is right near the surface.
It's just a few meters down.
But when the El Niño giant arrives, the sheer volume of warm water pushes that thermocline hundreds of feet deeper into the crushing dark.
Now, here is the devastating part. The coastal winds, they are still blowing.
They didn't stop.
No. The Coriolis effect is still happening. The silent underwater elevator is still running, trying its absolute hardest to pull water up to the surface.
But the cargo has changed.
Exactly. Because the cold, nutrient-rich water has been pushed so incredibly deep by the thermal blanket, the elevator can't reach it anymore.
The elevator cable's too short.
Basically, yeah. The upwelling process only pulls from the top layer of water, so the elevator is just cycling warm, empty, nutrient-depleted water.
The fertilizer is completely gone. And almost overnight, the microscopic forest starves.
It just disappears.
The beautiful diatoms, the glass-shelled plankton, they die out. And the vibrant emerald green water turns a stark, perfectly clear, barren blue.
It is beautiful to look at, but biologically, it is a desert.
A complete desert. Let's put ourselves in the perspective of one of those millions of anchoveta.
Yeah.
You are darting through water that is suddenly uncomfortably dangerously warm.
Yeah.
And far worse, the food has just vanished.
They're immediately faced with a desperate, brutal biological calculus.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, their metabolism is tied to the water temperature. The warmer the water, the faster their metabolism runs.
Good.
Which means they actually need more food just to survive right at the exact moment that the food has disappeared.
It is a cruel irony. So what do? Do they swim away?
They try. The anchoveta are forced to plunge. Because they are trapped by the warm water at the surface, their only escape is to dive desperately into the dark, crushing depths, searching for where the cold, nutrient-rich water has retreated.
They have to leave the sunlight.
They abandon the sunlit surface entirely. Many try to migrate south toward colder waters. But millions upon millions of them simply run out of energy and they starve.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when billions of small silverfish vanish into the deep or die, the ocean goes terrifyingly quiet.
Eerily quiet.
But the tragedy of El Niño doesn't stop at the water's edge. Because in this ecosystem, everything is tethered to those silverfish. Let's look high above the water, up to the jagged coastal cliffs of Peru.
The seabirds.
Yes, millions of seabirds like the iguana cormorant are returning to their nests. They are magnificent, sleek, black and white birds that rely entirely on diving into the ocean to scoop up those anchovetas.
And the cormorants are currently raising chicks. The chicks are demanding, incredibly loud, and growing fast.
They need a lot of food.
So much food. The adults fly out over the ocean, look down, and instead of seeing shimmering schools of fish near the surface, they see nothing but clear, empty blue water.
So when the birds dive, they hit that warm blanket. They swim deeper, but the fish are gone, pushed too deep for the birds to reach.
Right.
Driven by the primal, inescapable instinct of their own starvation, the adult birds make a heartbreaking choice.
It is a physiological response to extreme stress. When an adult bird cannot find enough calories to sustain its own heartbeat, it abandons the nest.
They just leave the chicks.
It is a survival mechanism. If the adult dies, the chick dies anyway. But if the adult survives, it might live to breed another year.
Nature is harsh.
It is. So millions of adults take to the sky, scattering across the Pacific in a desperate, often completely futile search for food.
Millions of chicks are left behind on the silent cliffs. It is a stunning, tragic domino effect. A shift in the wind thousands of miles away in Indonesia sends a blanket of heat across the ocean,
That heat pushes down the cold water.
breaking the silent elevator. The elevator stops delivering nutrients, starving the microscopic forest. The forest dies, starving the silver fish. The fish vanish, and the coastal cliffs fall silent.
It's all connected.
And the ripples of that empty ocean even reach human shores, altering global food supplies as the fisheries collapse into the warm blue void.
That is the raw mechanical power of the ocean. Every single living thing is deeply, inextricably bound to the physical temperature of the water.
Right.
But the anchoveta and the cormorants are just the first to feel the giant's arrival. As the warmth spreads out, blanketing the equatorial Pacific, it encounters a completely different kind of landscape.
A chain of volcanic islands rising stark and black from the churning sea.
The Galápagos.
We are moving west now, away from the South American coast, out into the open ocean toward the Galápagos Islands. And here, clinging to the rugged, sun-baked shores, we meet a creature that looks like it crawled straight out of the Jurassic period.
The marine iguana.
Picture a prehistoric-looking reptile, roughly the size of a large cat, covered in salt-encrusted black scales, with a blunt snout and a crest of spines running down its back. It clings to the jagged black volcanic rocks with incredibly sharp claws, staring out at the crashing surf.
They are so unique. These iguanas are absolutely unique on the planet. They are the only marine lizards in the world.
The only ones.
And their entire evolutionary existence is tied to the cold, nutrient-rich currents that normally bathe the Galápagos.
Because they're cold-blooded.
Right, they are ectotherms. Their body temperature is dictated by their environment. To eat, they must plunge into the freezing, turbulent ocean, holding their breath and slowing their heart rates as they dive down.
And what are they looking for down there?
They scrape vibrant, highly nutritious red and green algae off the submerged rocks.
It's a harsh life. They dive into freezing water, scrape off the algae with their blunt teeth, and then drag their freezing bodies back onto the black rocks to let the sun become warm again so they can digest.
And they sneeze out the salt.
Yeah, sneezing out the salt.
Yeah.
But then, the blanket of El Niño warmth surrounds the islands. The ocean temperature spikes dramatically.
It does.
And just like the microscopic forest off the coast of Peru, the vibrant red and green algae that the iguanas depend on are incredibly sensitive to temperature.
They require cold water and the high nutrients that come with it. When the warm water moves in, the nutrients drop, and the thermal stress becomes too much.
So the food dies.
The beautiful red and green algae forests completely die off.
But the rocks don't just stay bare.
Yeah.
Right? Nature abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. In place of the nutritious green and red algae, a completely different kind of life takes over.
What grows instead?
A species of brown algae, specifically a type called Gifordia, begins to bloom across the underwater rocks.
Oh.
This brown algae thrives in the warmer, nutrient-poor waters of an El Niño event. So very quickly, the underwater pastures are covered in a thick brown fuzz.
So our marine iguana, getting hungry, dives into the water. It fights the crashing surf, swims down to its usual feeding grounds, and finds its underwater pastures completely transformed.
Covered in brown fuzz.
But it's still algae, right? Why can't the iguana just adapt and eat the brown algae?
Because of the iguana's specialized digestive system.
Oh, they can't digest it.
Right. They have evolved specialized gut microbes to break down the specific cellulose structures of the red and green algae. The brown algae is biologically completely different.
Different how?
It is highly fibrous, incredibly tough, and virtually indigestible for the iguana. Even worse, it actually contains mildly toxic compounds that give the iguana severe gastric distress.
It's like a human being surrounded by a massive feast of plastic fruit. It looks like food, but eating it will only hurt you, and it provides absolutely no calories.
That's a perfect analogy. So the iguana crawls back onto the black rocks, shivering, sneezing out excess sea salt from its nostrils, and facing months of absolute famine.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where the cruel reality of the ocean tests the very limits of biological endurance.
It really does. Think about their options.
The iguanas cannot migrate. They are lizards. They cannot swim across thousands of miles of open ocean to find colder water.
No, they are permanently bound to these isolated islands.
And yet, if they simply sit on the rocks and wait for the cold water to return, their metabolisms will burn through their fat reserves, their muscles will waste away, and they will die.
Most animals would just face mass extinction, but to survive the starvation brought by the invisible warm giant, the marine iguana pulls off a biological magic trick that defies belief.
This blew my mind. It doesn't just lose weight, it literally shrinks its own body length.
When scientists first observed this, they didn't believe their own data.
I mean, how could you?
Right. They were measuring these iguanas year after year, and suddenly, after an El Niño event, the adult iguanas were measuring centimeters shorter than they were the year before.
Centimeters.
The researchers initially thought they were just making errors with their tape measures. Vertebrates are not supposed to be able to shrink their skeletal structure once they are adults.
Hold on, I need to understand how this is even biologically possible. Losing fat makes sense. Losing muscle mass, sure, your body burns it for fuel.
Yeah, standard starvation response.
But shrinking bones? How does a vertebrate shrink its skeleton without its entire body collapsing?
It comes down to a hyper-accelerated version of a process called bone remodeling. In all vertebrates, including humans, bones are not just dead stone, they are living tissue.
Okay.
We have cells called osteoblasts that build bone, and cells called osteoclasts that break it down and reabsorb the minerals into the bloodstream.
Okay, so building and breaking down happens constantly.
Right. Normally, these two forces are in perfect balance, but during an El Niño famine, the extreme stress triggers a massive release of a hormone called corticosterone.
Corticosterone.
This hormone effectively flips a switch in the iguana's body. It signals the osteoclasts, the bone breakers, to go into absolute overdrive.
While the bone builders shut down.
Exactly. The bone builders completely shut down. The iguana's body begins to actively dissolve its own skeletal structure, reabsorbing the calcium and phosphate just to maintain basic vital metabolic functions.
Imagine that. Your body, sensing that there isn't enough food to sustain your current size, begins to dissolve your own spine and skull to conserve energy. How much smaller do they actually get?
An adult marine iguana can become up to 20% shorter in total body length during a severe El Niño event.
20%?
To put that into perspective, if a 6-foot-tall human did this, they would shrink down to 4 foot 10 inches in a matter of months.
That is terrifying, but amazing.
By becoming physically smaller, they drastically reduce their surface-to-volume ratio and their overall caloric requirements. They turn themselves into smaller, highly fuel-efficient versions of themselves just to survive on the meager scraps of energy they have left.
That is a profound testament to biological resilience. This creature resorts to literally cannibalizing its own skeleton to endure a shift of just a few degrees in water temperature.
And the most incredible part, when the El Niño giant finally passes...
That always passes.
Right. When the westerly winds die down, the trade winds return, and the cold green water rushes back up from the deep, the red and green algae return.
And the iguanas.
They gorge themselves, they switch the osteoblasts back on, and they literally regrow their bones back to their original adult size.
It is a magical, brutal adaptation. They shrink their very bones to wait out the heat. But not every creature in the ocean has the evolutionary luxury of shrinking.
No, most don't.
Some have to rely on mobility. Some have to swim. And to see how that plays out, we have to travel far to the north, tracking the long, creeping fingers of that warm water as it travels up the coastline of the Americas.
We are heading up to California.
We are leaving the equator and moving up into the coastal waters off California, near the rocky, isolated sanctuary of the Channel Islands. The water here is normally driven by the California current, rich, cold, and dark.
And resting on the rocky, wave-battered shoreline is a California sea lion.
She is a massive, sleek, marine mammal covered in golden brown fur, and tucked safely against her side, resting on the rocks, is a small, incredibly vocal pup.
Pups are very loud.
Very loud. And this pup is entirely 100% dependent on its mother's rich, high-fat milk for survival.
And under normal conditions, the mother sea lion's life is a perfect, rhythmic cycle of short foraging trips.
She goes out, she comes back.
She leaves her crying pup on the safety of the rocks, slides into the cold, nutrient-rich California current, and swims out to hunt.
What is she hunting for?
She is looking for vast, shimmering clouds of market squid and schools of cold water forage fish. She gorges herself for a day or two, filling her stomach, and then returns to the island full of energy.
To convert that seafood into thick milk to nurse her pup.
Exactly. But the ocean is changing. The warmth of El Niño doesn't just stay at the equator, it travels along the coasts.
It's like it rides the coastline up.
Right. It's a phenomenon known as coastal trapped waves. The thermal blanket creeps up the coast of Mexico, up past Baja, and into California, pushing the cold, nutrient-rich water deep down, just like it did in Peru.
And the marine life senses this shift immediately.
Especially the squid. Market squid are incredibly sensitive to water temperature.
Why do they need the cold so badly?
They need cold water because cold water holds more dissolved oxygen, which their high-performance metabolisms require.
Oh, interesting.
When the warm water invades, they cannot tolerate it, so they perform a massive disappearing act. Entire populations of squid flee hundreds of miles north, migrating toward the frigid, still safe waters of the Pacific Northwest.
So they just leave. The entire localized ecosystem is turned completely upside down. The cold water forage fish vanish along with the squid.
And nature, in its strange way of balancing things out, brings in bizarre tropical travelers to replace them.
Right, because the water is warm now.
Because the water is now tropical, brightly colored, warm water pelagic fish like mahi-mahi, yellowtail, and even marlin are suddenly swimming in the usually freezing waters near San Francisco.
A marlin in San Francisco, that's surreal.
They follow the warm water highway north, completely lost in this displaced tropical pocket.
But the mother sea lion isn't equipped for this new world. Why doesn't she just eat the mahi-mahi? I mean, it's right there.
Because of biomechanics and energetics.
Okay, break that down for me.
A sea lion is perfectly adapted to plunge into dense, schooling clouds of small fish and squid, where one dive yields dozens of prey. Mahi-mahi and marlin are solitary, lightning-fast, open ocean predators.
Oh, they're way too fast.
A sea lion trying to chase down a mahi-mahi is like a person trying to catch a cheetah on foot. She expends far more energy in the chase than she could ever get back from the catch.
So her preferred food is gone, and the new food is impossible to catch. The mother sea lion slides off the rocks into the water, leaving her pup behind, and begins to swim.
But there's nothing there.
She swims out into the ocean, but the water is warm, empty, and silent. She pushes further and further out to sea, her energy reserves draining with every mile.
It becomes a desperate calculus of survival, and it's worse than just swimming far. Swimming through warmer water actually increases her metabolic rate.
Really?
Yeah, meaning she is burning calories faster just by existing in the heat. Because the fish have moved hundreds of miles north, her hunting trips, which usually last a single day, stretch into an exhausting, grueling marathon.
She swims for 3 days, then 5 days. Sometimes she is forced to abandon her pup on that rocky shore for up to 8 agonizing days.
8 days is a lifetime for a pup.
The pup is left on the beach, fasting. Its cries get weaker as it burns through its own meager fat reserves, waiting for a mother who is swimming on the absolute edge of exhaustion, racing against time.
It's heartbreaking.
When she finally returns, dragging her battered, exhausted body onto the rocks, she barely has enough energy left to sustain her own life, let alone produce the thick milk the pup desperately needs.
This tragedy highlights a critical disconnect in how we view the ocean. We often see ocean currents and temperature anomalies as abstract, colorful lines on a map.
Right, like weather patterns on the news.
But an invisible shift in those currents, just a couple of degrees of heat, causes heartbreaking, highly visible changes on the beaches. The ocean forces a mother to choose between her own physiological survival and the survival of her offspring.
To the anchoveta, the shrinking iguana, and the exhausted sea lion, those few degrees are the absolute difference between life and death.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing. All those animals, despite their struggles, have options.
They do.
The fish can dive deeper. The iguana can alter its own skeleton. The sea lion can swim hundreds of miles. But there is one majestic, incredibly complex underwater civilization that is completely trapped.
They are cemented to the seafloor.
They cannot move a single inch to escape the heat.
To witness their plight, we must leave the cold coastal currents entirely and travel to the shallow, brilliantly sunlit tropical reefs of the world.
We are diving down into an absolute explosion of color. We're looking at the coral reef, the bustling, intricate 3D architecture of the ocean.
Reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, but they are home to a quarter of all marine biodiversity.
And if we look incredibly closely, zooming in right down past the clownfish and the sharks, down to the microscopic level, we meet the tiny architects of this massive city.
The coral polyp.
A coral polyp is an animal. It looks very much like a tiny translucent sea anemone or a jellyfish sitting upside down inside a hard white limestone cup that it built for itself.
And during the night, it reaches its tiny tentacles out to grab floating plankton.
But plankton alone isn't nearly enough to build the massive continent-spanning structures of a coral reef. The polyp doesn't build this city alone.
No, it has help.
Inside the clear, translucent tissues of the polyp lives a microscopic partner, a single-celled, highly colorful, photosynthesizing algae called zooxanthellae.
This partnership is one of the most perfect, efficient symbioses in all of nature.
It's like a landlord and a tenant.
Right, yeah, exactly. The coral provides a safe, protected, sunlit home and gives the algae the carbon dioxide and waste products it needs to grow.
And what does the algae do in return?
In return, the algae act like tiny internal solar panels. They use the intense tropical sunlight to perform photosynthesis, creating massive amounts of energy in the form of glucose and glycerol.
Sugar, basically.
Lots of sugar. And the algae is generous. It leaks up to 90% of the food it makes directly into the tissues of the coral polyp.
90%.
The coral uses that massive energy subsidy to build its hard limestone skeleton.
So it's building its own house with solar power.
Yes. It is this microscopic algae living by the millions inside the clear coral tissue that gives the entire reef its brilliant, vibrant colors. The neon greens, the deep purples, the mustard yellows.
But then a super El Niño arrives.
A super one.
The invisible giant settles over the tropical Pacific, and unlike the quick pulses of heat near the coasts, this immense pool of water sits over the reefs, and it refuses to leave.
It just sits there.
The water gets warm, then it gets uncomfortably warm. And the real danger for the reef isn't just the daytime heat, is it?
No, it's the fact that the water doesn't cool down at night. The ocean is running a prolonged, inescapable thermal fever.
The coral polyp begins to suffocate. But the true tragedy doesn't happen to the animal first. It happens on a microscopic chemical level deep inside the algae.
That's where the breakdown starts.
Explain to me exactly why the heat breaks this perfect partnership.
It comes down to the machinery of photosynthesis. Inside the algae's chloroplasts, there is a complex protein structure called photosystem II.
Photosystem II.
It is the engine that captures photons of sunlight and turns them into chemical energy. But this protein complex is incredibly sensitive to heat.
Okay, so it gets hot.
Under intense, relentless thermal stress, a critical protein within this engine, the D1 protein, physically warps and breaks down.
So the engine breaks.
Yeah.
But the sun is still shining. The algae is still absorbing all this solar energy, but it has nowhere to put it.
Exactly. The electron transport chain backs up. The algae is absorbing intense sunlight, but because its machinery is broken, it can't convert that light into food.
It's just taking in pure energy.
The trapped energy has to go somewhere, so it starts reacting with the water and oxygen inside the cell. It creates what are called reactive oxygen species, or ROS.
Free radicals.
Yes. Highly toxic, incredibly destructive molecules of oxygen.
So the beautiful, colorful algae that has fed and sustained the coral for its entire life suddenly becomes a poison factory.
A poison factory inside its own tissue.
It begins producing toxic oxygen that burns the cellular walls of the coral polyp from the inside out.
The coral's immune system goes into overdrive. It is burning from the inside.
It is forced to make a devastating split-second evolutionary choice. To survive the toxic poison being pumped into its tissues, it must violently expel its lifelong partner.
The eviction.
The coral polyp physically ejects the colorful algae, spitting it out into the ocean current.
It's a desperate act of self-preservation, but when millions of coral polyps simultaneously evict their colorful partners, the vibrant, bustling city changes in an instant.
Because the algae provided all the color, right?
Yes, and the polyp tissue is mostly translucent, so suddenly all you can see is the white limestone skeleton underneath.
So what does this all mean? The color drains away completely. The vibrant city turns into a ghostly, bone-white landscape. This is the mechanism behind coral bleaching.
That's exactly what bleaching is.
But I want to make something very clear to the listener. When the coral turns white, it isn't dead. Not yet.
Correct. The animal, the tiny polyp, is still alive inside its white limestone cup, but it is now profoundly alone, and it is starving.
Because it just kicked out its food source.
Without the algae, it has lost 90% of its daily caloric intake. It tries to survive by waving its tentacles, catching whatever passing plankton it can, but it's just not enough.
It's barely scraping by.
If the warm giant lingers too long, if the water doesn't cool down fast enough for the coral to reabsorb new algae from the water column, the polyp will starve to death.
And once the animal dies, the city falls. Without the living coral to constantly repair the limestone, the ocean goes to work.
Boring sponges and algae overgrow the white skeletons. The structure becomes brittle.
And eventually, the bustling 3D architecture slowly collapses into a flat, lifeless rubble. The fish that relied on the nooks and crannies to hide from predators are forced to flee or are eaten.
The reef transforms from the most vibrant, densely populated ecosystem on Earth into a silent, white graveyard.
This is the immense ecosystem-destroying power of the El Niño giant. It rewrites the rules of survival for the anchoveta, the iguana, the sea lion, and the coral reef.
It changes everything.
It forces you to wonder, how long does it take for the ocean's heartbeat to bring the cold water back? How long before the currents shift, the algae returns, and the color is breathed back into the ghost reefs?
It can take years, sometimes decades.
But as incredibly powerful as this giant is underwater, the ocean and the atmosphere are dance partners. What happens in the water never, ever stays in the water.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand the true planetary reach of this giant, we have to look up from the ghost reefs, break through the surface of the ocean, and look straight up at the sky.
We are talking about the atmospheric bridge.
Precisely. The warmth of the ocean dictates the weather of the world through a massive atmospheric engine called the Walker circulation.
Walker circulation.
It is a very simple thermodynamic rule. Warm water heats the air above it, warm air rises, and as it rises, it carries massive amounts of evaporated water vapor with it.
When that wet air gets high up into the freezing upper atmosphere, the water vapor condenses into clouds, releasing latent heat and creating massive, towering thunderstorms.
So, wherever you find the giant pool of warmest water in the ocean, you will find a nearly permanent cap of torrential thunderstorms directly above it.
Normally, that pool of warm water and its attendant thunderstorms sit squarely over Indonesia and the Western Pacific, dumping incredibly heavy, reliable rain on the rainforests there.
But when the wind drops and the El Niño giant surges eastward across the ocean, it doesn't just move the heat.
It drags the whole system.
It drags the entire thunderstorm engine, the entire rising column of air across the Pacific with it.
It drags the sky itself.
Oh.
Let's look at two vastly different pieces of land experiencing this atmospheric shift at the exact same moment.
Where are we starting?
First, we traveled to the coast of South America, to the Atacama Desert in Chile.
Ah, the Atacama. This is normally the driest, non-polar place on Earth. It sits in the rain shadow of the towering Andes Mountains, and the cold water off the coast usually prevents any rain clouds from forming.
I mean, some parts of this desert go years, sometimes decades, without seeing a single drop of rain.
The ground is baked, cracked, salty, and utterly lifeless.
But the sky above has changed. The thunderstorms have followed the warm ocean water eastward. The massive, towering cumulonimbus clouds bump up against the Andes Mountains.
And they just dump everything.
Suddenly, the sky over the Atacama opens up. Torrential, tropical rain begins to pound the bone-dry sand. It is a deluge unlike anything the desert has seen in a decade.
Dry riverbeds suddenly roar with flash floods, and then a miracle happens.
What kind of miracle?
Hidden beneath that cracked, baked earth are millions of seeds. These are ephemeral plants. They have evolved specialized coatings that prevent them from germinating until they are soaked by a massive, sustained amount of water.
So they just wait.
They can lie dormant in the baking sand for 10-15 years, just waiting for the giant to shift the sky.
The rain washes away the chemical inhibitors on the seeds, and as the sun comes out, the desert explodes.
It's beautiful.
Millions of incredibly colorful flowers erupt from the sand, painting the once brown, desolate landscape in impossible, vibrant shades of purple, yellow, and red.
It is an event called the Desierto Florido, a miraculous, beautiful desert bloom born entirely from the warm breath of the ocean thousands of miles away.
It is breathtaking. But the ocean always demands balance. The atmosphere is a closed loop.
Right. If air is rising massively in the central and eastern Pacific, dumping life-giving rain onto the Atacama Desert, that air has to come back down somewhere else.
And that brings us to the other end of the atmospheric bridge.
The sinking air.
We travel back west, across the ocean, to the lush, emerald green rainforests of Indonesia and the vast expanse of the Australian bush.
These are places perfectly adapted to heavy, consistent, daily rainfall.
But the rain clouds have been dragged away. The air that was rising over the ocean is now sinking over Australia and Indonesia.
And sinking air is incredibly dry. It suppresses cloud formation. It suppresses rain. The sky here becomes unnaturally, relentlessly clear.
The sun beats down, month after month. The humidity plummets. The vibrant rainforest leaves turn brittle, brown, and crackling dry.
The peat bogs in Indonesia dry out. In Australia, the vast eucalyptus forests trees, whose leaves are already packed with highly flammable volatile oils, become parched.
The entire continent turns into a massive tinderbox.
The landscape is primed for disaster. And then, a single spark, a dry lightning strike from a passing rainless storm or human activity ignites a catastrophe.
A dry brush catches fire. Because the air is so dry and the wind is fierce, massive, uncontrollable wildfires tear through the forests.
They burn so hot they create their own weather system, sending plumes of thick, black smoke so high into the atmosphere that they can be seen clearly from space, circling the globe.
This is the terrifying symmetry of the atmospheric bridge. The sky connects a starving silver anchovy in Peru, struggling in the clear blue water, to a miraculous blooming purple flower in the Atacama Desert, and binds them both to a raging apocalyptic wildfire in Australia.
The ocean dictates the rhythm of the rain, moving life and death across the continents like chess pieces on a board.
And that brings us right here. Right now, we are looking at the ocean in May 2026. Currently, the Pacific is holding its breath.
It is officially in what climate scientists call a neutral state.
Really.
The winds are blowing normally, the cold water is upwelling, the giant is resting, but the signs are there.
We are listening to the whispers of the ocean. Down in the depths, along the thermocline, the currents are shifting. The steady trade winds on the surface near Indonesia are beginning to falter once again.
They are whispering.
Deep below, entirely out of sight of the satellites, a new, massive pool of warmth is gathering its strength. It is beginning that slow-motion, eastward undulation.
The forecast models are predicting a 70% chance that the giant is waking up right now as we speak. By the end of 2026, it is preparing to completely dominate the Pacific once again.
But this raises a profound and deeply concerning question. We have seen what the giant can do in its natural cycle. But how does this immense force of nature behave in an ocean that is already running a fever?
This raises an important question, yes. The stage we are playing on is fundamentally different now.
Because of global warming.
Right. Over the last century, the background temperature of our entire globe has been steadily rising. And the ocean, acting as the ultimate planetary shock absorber, has absorbed over 90% of that excess heat.
The baseline ocean heat content is the highest it has ever been in recorded human history.
So when the El Niño giant wakes up today, it isn't just adding its warmth to a cold ocean.
It's layering it.
It is superimposing its immense natural heat spike onto an ocean that is already sitting dangerously close to the absolute thermal limits of marine life.
The threshold for survival, the safety net that these creatures have evolved over millions of years, is dropping rapidly. If the water is normally 80 degrees and El Niño adds 5 degrees, the reef hits 85 and might survive.
Exactly.
But if the baseline water is already 85 degrees and the giant adds its 5 degrees, the reef hits 90 and the biological machinery shatters.
The margin for error is just gone.
Gone. The incredible shrinking bones of the marine iguana are going to be tested to their absolute limits as the toxic brown algae blooms thicker and longer.
The desperate, exhausting swim of the mother sea lion is going to stretch even further, leaving more pups crying on the hot rocks.
The ghostly white of the coral reefs will happen faster, trigger more easily, and linger far longer, pushing the polyps past starvation and into death.
They are acting out their ancient struggle for survival on a warmer, much more unforgiving stage than ever before.
The ocean is not just an empty, abstract expanse of salt water that separates the continents. It is a living, breathing, interconnected engine.
Every single component, from the microscopic diatoms to the massive atmospheric winds, is deeply, inextricably linked.
We've traveled alongside an invisible thermal giant today. We felt the heavy, suffocating blanket of heat pressed down on the Humboldt Current.
We felt the desperate hunger of the darting silver anchoveta as the cold water and the microscopic forest vanished.
We sat on the black volcanic rocks and marveled at the prehistoric marine iguana, performing a brutal biological magic trick, literally shrinking its own skeleton to wait out the heat.
We swam alongside the exhausted sea lion mother, torn between the empty, barren ocean and the cries of her pup.
We zoomed in to witness the tragic, microscopic betrayal inside the coral reef as broken machinery turned a vibrant 3D city into a white ghost town.
And we broke the surface to see how the sky connects it all, turning an arid, lifeless desert into a miraculous blooming garden while simultaneously setting a lush rainforest on fire.
A single faltering sigh of wind in the western Pacific can literally alter the spin of the Earth, shift the global jet streams, and dictate the rainfall and weather in your own backyard.
It reminds us that no matter where we live on this planet, whether it's on a jagged volcanic island, a towering coastal cliff, or a sprawling city far inland, completely out of sight of the waves, we are all deeply bound to the sovereign, undulating rhythms of the living sea.
We all live downstream from the breathing engine of the ocean.
And right now, out in the dark blue, the giant is stirring again.
The winds are whispering.
The water is heavy, And the ocean is preparing to change the world once more.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the interconnected wonders of the ocean. Until the currents bring us together again, keep listening to the tides, and we'll see you next time on Saltwater Stories.